is where we run into a lot of strife.
So perhaps then we can just speak briefly about miscarriage and abortion, based on some of the things that you've already spoken about these emotions that exist within a lot of people about children and having their own children. So what's occurring with miscarriage and abortion? What impact does that have upon a soul?
Well, both has quite a severe impact on the development of a child's soul once the child passes to the spirit world. God intended for a gradual development to occur and the physical process be a necessary part of that development. You know, so God's intention was to make every person go through a developmental process that begins in the physical, that ends up in the metaphysical or the spiritual body, and then that develops into some kind of soul awareness. And that was God's original intention. Now, obviously, if you take away a child through let's look at abortion, taking away a child from the ability for it to experience a physical life, now its education is severely impacted upon. And what I mean is it's life-based education, not the education that we receive at universities or schools here on earth, but rather God's life-based education is severely impacted upon, and this requires then a lot of care and consideration to be given to these children after they pass. Now, what is probably less understood is, you know, because I think that's, to some extent, there are, you know, so-called anti-abortionists and pro-abortionists on the planet, it seems, and the anti-abortionists, to some extent, understand that kind of stance in terms of the effect that it has on the child. Of course, they don't understand it from a spiritual perspective. They only understand it that you're preventing their physical life or physical existence. But there is a little bit of understanding there. But when it comes to the other aspect, which is the you know, pregnancies that are terminated through the emotional state of the mothers and fathers, which are to do with, what do we call that? Not abortion, but miscarriages. When it comes to miscarriages, there's very little understood as to why child miscarriages, the pregnancy miscarriages. And the reality is that there is a severe impact upon children of miscarriages as well. And a lot of the miscarriages are caused by the environment for the child that's now gestating in the womb being so toxic emotionally that the child miscarriages. It can no longer wants to maintain its connection with its own physical form. And these kind of children too also experience quite severe restrictions of development in their first formative years, up until, quite often it's up to 30 or even 50 years of their life afterwards, are very slowly developing because of the poor start that they've had by not being able to be present in the physical form.
Now, you mentioned, so we're talking a little bit now about the causes of these things. As we go through this discussion, we'll talk about the effect, because we'll talk a lot more about the soul and the different bodies and stuff.
Sure.
So on.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned something there that I just thought would be good to touch upon. You said the woman's womb is so toxic. Now, I can feel women everywhere who've had
having a lot of resentment about that,
having a fairly hard time with that that statement. So perhaps you could just clarify a little bit more.
Well, when you speak with, you know, which we do frequently, we speak to children that have been miscarried. There are very consistent signs of the reason why they miscarried. And in almost every case, it is a very strong demand of mother or father or both parents that this particular child fulfill a role in those parents' lives in some way. And this demand is so strong in those particular parents and so needy that the children find the environment of the womb so difficult to maintain for themselves and their own enjoyment of life that they feel like they want to exit it.
Would it be fair to say they don't feel it's a nurturing place to be?
Well, it's certainly not a nurturing place. As we know, on the planet, many men and women have quite strong and severe addictions to having children, a lot of which have nothing to do with the desire to love and cherish a child, but rather have a lot to do with their own personal needs and addictions.
Yeah.
And this is where these needs and addictions get projected upon the child. And unfortunately, because the child at this stage is basically just a feeling entity with very little intellect, all it feels is a barrage of emotion that is drawing upon their energy to such a point that their energy systems cannot even sustain life connected to the body, the physical body anymore, inside of the womb. And that causes then the termination. So by the child, if a miscarriage occurs, it's because the child can no longer maintain its own energy connection with the two bodies that have been created anymore. And that's due to the amount of energy that is being drawn from the child's soul by usually the parents. Usually it's directly the parents. And in particular, the mother has a large part to play in that. But both mothers and fathers bear responsibility for those drawings of energy that occur for the child while it's in the womb.
Yeah.
Now, many people don't want to hear that, of course, because they then feel that basically I'm blaming them for the miscarriage. Well, I'm not blaming them for the miscarriage, because the emotions they have about why they need a child often came from their own childhood or their own prior experience. And so it's an epidemic within the human race, not necessarily within, and also, of course, within the individuals who are having a child, but it comes from previous people in the human race, usually their own parents, that have caused them to have these strong or high demands of a child.
Yeah. And if I can just add, because I've spoken with some of these children who have been miscarried, the predominant feeling they have is that they themselves, their unique personality, is being rejected. Yes. There's a massive desire within the mother or both parents for a child, but it's not for this unique personality, this little person. It's so that this person gives the mother and father something that they desperately want.
Yes.
And so what the child feels is a complete rejection of them and a complete feeling that they must fulfill
the role,
or fulfill a need in a parent, and therefore it feels very, very difficult to remain.
Yes. So these children also find it very difficult to live in the spirit world in the initial phases of their life for the same reasons that an aborted child does, and that is they have not had the start that God intended for them to have, which is a long enough life in the physical form to actually learn many things about desire, will, and other spiritual aspects of our existence. And of course, that means that they then have to learn it or be taught it in their spirit state only.
So we'll talk more about the fact that we go on to have a spirit life later in this message, but it does seem that, it just seems like a very intense way to start your existence, doesn't it? These different ways that we've just discussed, and I know that's why you wanted to raise them today.
Yes, so because we have such a we have much focus on our physical existence more than we do our spiritual or soul-based existence. And even a parent who wants to desperately have a child is really just focusing on their physical existence, which is a primary cause of many of these underlying problems that occur that then cause a lot of distress for others in society, and not only while they're here on earth, it causes distress after they've passed. And if we understood fully the effects that it had, then we would probably spend more time addressing the emotional things that cause these particular problems and work through them so they no longer caused a problem. Instead, we want to blame someone else. Usually what we finish up doing is blaming God or blaming some imperfection in the so-called creation process or the evolution process or whatever else we want to refer to it as. And we have a tendency to blame all these other things for the so-called unpredictable and sad events that occur in our life, particularly in relation to children. And unfortunately, because we don't understand, we don't fix the problem. And so the problem keeps reoccurring, not only for ourselves, but if we ever do manage to have a child, it probably will keep recurring for that child as well in its future, because unless an emotion is actually released, it has a long-term effect, not only on this generation, but on subsequent generations of people.
Yeah, yeah.